Let's go to New York now, where Sherwin Bryce Pease is standing by. Sherwin, you've been chatting to voters throughout the day, and not everyone lives in New York. However, they voted in New York. Give us a sense from where some of these experts are traveling from in New York, and what's the latest?
So, Oliver, New York, of course, one of 3 voting stations in the United States: Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., where the embassy is located, and here at the Consulate General based in Midtown Manhattan. And curiously, interesting, people from as far as Boston up on the East Coast, as far as Springfield, Illinois. I spoke to people from the British Virgin Islands that flew in on Thursday just to be in New York to vote. I also spoke to someone that flew in this morning from the Dominican Republic. They said there was no voting station there, and so they decided to come and spend the weekend in New York. So people coming from far and wide to vote at the very limited voting stations, given the limit that the IEC has in terms of the infrastructure that they have around the country, of course, depending on South Africa's government missions, including the consulate here in New York. I can tell you there was a long line just a minute ago behind me, but the process unfolding very quickly here in New York. Let's just give you a quick walkthrough. Come with me. This, of course, is the South African Consulate General. People come in, they check in downstairs, they come in here, they check their registration, their name is taken off the voters' roll, it is crossed out, they get their thumbs inked over here. We come through to the voting area, just follow me through here. This is where they get their ballot. They get 2 envelopes, envelope A in which they insert the ballot, and envelope B in which they have to write their name, ID number, and the location where they voted, and that then gets shipped to the IEC later. They then have the privacy of voting booths over here where they cast that ballot. So a very smooth running process. The process has been ongoing since 7 a.m. local time here in New York, and I can tell you we might not be seeing the queues that we are seeing around South Africa House in London, or perhaps the queues we have seen in The Hague in the Netherlands, but there has been a steady clip of people coming in here to vote. Some 1,700 plus voters expected in New York, and I can tell you that since 7 a.m. this morning there has been a steady flow of South Africans voting, a sense of enthusiasm, a sense of joy and elation, many talking about the privilege that the vote represents to many South Africans. Of course, this is the 7th democratic election, and you know, a vote and a right that has only been afforded to the majority of South Africans since, of course, 1994, and I think that's not lost on many of the voters we spoke to today, Oliver.
We see on social media, Sherwin, some people taking issue with people who have lived abroad for quite some time, and whether they have a deep understanding enough of some of the issues facing South Africans, given that they haven't been the milieu of the issues during their time away. What sense are you getting from the voters abroad about their understanding about some of the issues at play here at home?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, a lot of people I spoke to said they were very much, they might live abroad now, but their intention was to return home at some point. So they are very invested in the future dynamics of South Africa, where South Africa goes from here. A number of people saying that they are very engaged in their families live back home, and they certainly seem to be apprised of some of the issues, right? People talking about the NHI bill that was signed into law by President Cyril Ramaphosa this week, not very popular from the sense we get from voters here. A lot of people talking about load shedding, corruption, the infrastructure deficit that has been plaguing South African cities in terms of water, roads, and the like. So it's certainly an appearance that people are still very much engaged in the issues back home, despite the fact that they've lived out of the country for a long time. It's an issue I raised with Professor Sean Jacobs. He's a professor of international affairs at the New School University here in New York. And I said to him, you know, how is South Africa viewed from afar? This is what he said. Watch.
If you live outside South Africa now looks, South Africa internationally, South Africa is riding a sort of a wave because of its stance it took against Israel in the International Court of Justice on the side of Palestinians. So South Africa is it's very popular. It's sort of, you know, some people see it as a potential leader for the global South. It's ironic that this happens at a time when the ANC is very unpopular at home. So when South Africa is about to take this kind of leadership in the world that everybody was hoping one day it would take, it just happens when it seems the ANC has sort of, all the credit that it had, it doesn't have that credit at home anymore. And so if the ANC comes to power, we are a much weaker ANC. won't have the same kind of legitimacy. And so all these kind of things that you associated with South African democracy, the promise of it, the role that it could have played in the world, I think some of that has been squandered. But overall, I think South Africa has done well. Remember, we've had more than 300 years of versions of oppression, denying people rights. We've only experimented with how to be human for 30 years. And I think on that basis, South Africa has done well. It's a very robust country. In the US, people are trying to prevent people from voting. That's not the case in South Africa. There's no trying to prevent people from voting. I think South Africans' elections are sort of carnivalesque. People look forward to elections. People actually love fulfilling their right as a citizen.
And Oliver, a common theme that we hear from voters is that they want to vote for change. And that's certainly something we hear from a multitude of voters that we've spoken to this morning.
Just from a process perspective, just remind us what the process is like. Of course, we know that international voters or those voting abroad only get to vote in the national election ballot and not in some of the newly introduced ballots, such as the regional ballot upon which independent candidates could be voted for. Walk us through that process.
Yeah, so essentially you vote abroad only in the national election, so you are essentially helping determine the representation of all the parties in the National Assembly that subsequently will vote for the president. Remember, the president is not directly elected by the voter, it's voted by the parties you vote for to represent you in Parliament. And so the final process here, when this polling station closes at 9 p.m. tonight, the ballots, right, those envelopes I was telling you about, envelope A and envelope B with your name, ID, and your voting station will then go into the ballot box behind me. That then gets put into a secure courier parcel that is going to be collected by a designated service provider that will then return the ballots from this mission, the mission in DC, Los Angeles, and missions around the world to the IEC headquarters in South Africa, where envelope B, will be opened, discarded, and then the ballot in envelope A will then be processed with other votes, counted and tabulated with other votes when the voting, the counting commences in South Africa after polling stations close on the 29th of May.
And just lastly, Sherwin, before I let you go there, an unprecedented number of new political parties are participating in this election for the very first time. Do voters abroad know about many of these newly formed political parties, and do they have any representation amongst party agents currently working at the mission you're at?
Well, there are only EFF party agents. There were 2 EFF party agents we spoke to. We spoke to one in the clip you played earlier. I haven't seen any representation from the ANC or the DA or any of the other parties, as we might have seen 5 years ago. They certainly had representation at the polling station 5 years ago. But there is representation. There are also some independent observers from something called the Ground Up Collective. They are here observing this process, and certainly from a clip we played earlier, they believe the process is unfolding smoothly, and it's a very efficient process here in New York. But yeah, very scant representation from party agents, but certainly independent observers are here watching the process here. And of course, the media is also here, Oliver. We're certainly keeping an eye too.
Yeah. Sherwin, thank you so much for that. Really do appreciate it. Sherwin Bryce Pease, SABC News correspondent.